StatCan has released the latest household debt numbers for Canada, and we've finally broken the $3 trillion mark. We're also going to talk about the filibuster in Parliament, the Liberals giving out free money for everyone, and the latest information around inflation, GDP, and interest rates. I've been gone for a while, there's a lot to cover this week, okay? That's right, folks, it's time for another Canadian news update with your old pal, MillennialMoron. Look, I know everyone's been asking why I haven't been making any content, and it's basically because I've been working all the time for the last couple of months. But I'm back home now, and I should be able to start producing content on a more regular schedule. Stop complaining and just watch the dang video. The first thing I want to talk about is the filibuster in Parliament. It's a really ridiculous story, but it hasn't gotten a lot of attention in the media, so I wasn't sure if people were actually aware of it or not. I did a little informal poll of it on some of my social media channels, and as it turns out, most people are totally unaware that it's going on. So, if you didn't know, all government business in Parliament has more or less been shut down for the past 8 weeks because of an ongoing filibuster. To explain what this is all about, I'm going to have to get into a bunch of background and some silly rules around parliamentary procedure, so try to stay with me here. This all starts with a report by the Auditor General into the Sustainable Development Technology Canada Fund, or SDTC, which found a bunch of examples where conflict of interest rules weren't followed properly when awarding funding to projects. On the 10th of June, the House of Commons ordered the government to provide all documents related to the SDTC to the RCMP for investigation within 30 days. The Liberals missed the deadline and have been refusing to provide unredacted copies of the documents, so at the end of September, the Speaker of the House made a ruling that, because the House has the authority to compel the government to produce documents and they failed to do so, it meant that there was a prima facie question of privilege. Prima facie means at first glance, and question of privilege means that a breach of parliamentary privilege may have occurred. This meant that the Conservatives were able to introduce a privilege motion to refer the issue to the Procedure and House Affairs Committee for investigation. Now, the thing about a privilege motion is that it takes priority over any other parliamentary business of the day, including government and opposition business, until the privilege motion has been debated and voted on. So, instead of voting on the motion and referring it to committee, the Conservatives have been filibustering their own motion to drag the debate out as long as possible to try to force the Liberals to turn over the documents, and this process has now been going on for 8 weeks. Now, there's been a lot of debate between the Liberals and Conservatives over who exactly is at fault in this situation, and as far as I'm concerned, it seems to be everybody. To start off, it seems like releasing the documents to the RCMP might not even be useful. According to their comments in the Public Accounts Committee, both the Ethics Commissioner and the Auditor General said they didn't find anything that indicated criminal conduct, and that if they did, they would have referred it to the RCMP themselves. A lot of the issues they found were more procedural things, like people with previously declared conflicts of interest voting on something after saying they no longer had a conflict of interest, but the SDTC hadn't actually gone through the process to verify it. To be honest, a lot of it just seems like sloppy paperwork. On top of that, the RCMP themselves have said that if the documents are sent to them from Parliament, they might not even be able to use them because any evidence they find wouldn't have come through the proper law enforcement channels. So, even if the government does send the documents, the RCMP might just have to decline them. So right now, we're in a position where any party could put a stop to this. The Conservatives could end the filibuster and allow the matter to be referred to the committee, which is the normal procedure for something like this. The Liberals could hand the documents over to the RCMP, who probably wouldn't be able to use them anyway. Or the NDP or Bloc Québécois could team up with the Liberals to vote to end the debate and vote on the motion and send it to committee. Unfortunately, it seems like everyone is currently happy to get nothing at all done for the past 2 months and let the filibuster keep going. This means that no other bills or motions can be passed by the government or the opposition, and things like confidence votes will be on hold until the filibuster ends. It also means that at a certain point, the government is going to miss their usual schedule for passing supply bills, which are how the government raises funds to support normal operations. If this filibuster, or a new one, drags out into the spring, it's possible that the government won't be able to pass a budget bill, and we could end up with a US-style government shutdown situation. Anyway, if you didn't know, now you know. At least we still get question period. Next, the Liberal government has announced that they're going to be providing a $250 rebate check to working Canadians, as well as a tax break on certain items during the holiday season. The rebate check will be provided to anyone who worked in 2023 and earned $150,000 or less for the year. According to the government, this represents 18.7 million Canadians. With a little quick math, that works out to a cost of just under $4.7 billion. To put this into context, according to the latest rental market report from rentals.ca, the average rent across Canada was $2,152. So that $250 check will pay almost 1% of your rent for the whole year, which is enough to live indoors for 3 days, 12 hours, and 48 minutes. Go ahead, sleep in a little on Monday, you're covered. In addition to the rebate check, there's going to be a tax holiday on GST for some items, such as beer and wine, certain prepared grocery items, restaurant meals, children's clothing and toys, books, Christmas trees, and snacks. The tax holiday is planned to last for 2 months from December 14th to February 15th. So if you own a business, I hope you like reconfiguring your POS systems because you're going to get to do it twice. By the way, if this idea sounds familiar, it's because the Conservatives proposed the same thing back in 2021 when it was widely panned as a ridiculous idea. Now, connecting the dots here back to the previous story, this tax holiday is supposed to start on December 14th, which is 3 weeks from now, and Trudeau has said he's urging all parties to pass the bill containing the tax holiday and rebate check as soon as possible. But, as you know, Parliament has been stuck in a filibuster for the past 8 weeks. So, in addition to be a fairly obvious ploy to throw money at people in the year before an election, I think it's also probably a tactic to break the filibuster. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has already stated that this tax holiday was an NDP demand, meaning that they're going to push for it to be passed in Parliament. So, there's a couple of things that can happen here. They'll allow the filibuster to continue, and the Liberals will use it to attack the Conservatives, saying, hey, we're trying to send you free money and axe the snacks tax, but the Conservatives won't let us. Or the NDP will vote with the Liberals to end debate on the filibuster motion so they can pass the bill. Personally, my guess is they'll do a little of both. Now, on top of that, linking this back to something I talked about back in March, federal MPs become eligible for the MP Lifetime Pension Plan after 6 years of service. The Liberals have indicated that the check for $250 will be delivered in the spring of 2025. Now, it seems a little odd that it would take only a couple of weeks to implement a tax holiday, but mailing out a check based on work you did in 2023 is going to take 4 months. But if the NDP does decide to hold off on an election until those checks are delivered, it means that Jagmeet Singh will pass the 6-year mark and be eligible for his pension. Good job, everyone. Next, StatCan just released the latest data for household debt, and we finally broke the $3 trillion mark. Well done. Also, I just want to take a quick second and talk about another reason why StatCan is my favorite government agency. On the 18th, I made a post asking why the data wasn't out yet, and I tagged the actual guy responsible for this dataset, and he quickly wrote back telling me it was going to be out 8:30 a.m. the next day. Then we had a little back and forth about a paper he'd written about corporate debt, and he gave me some extra info about household debt in a different data set. It's basically just a whole department of data nerds who are providing all sorts of very important information that nobody cares about or looks at. So, thanks StatCan, and thanks specifically to Dave. Anyway, we've got $3 trillion in household debt, which is a new record. That includes $2.2 trillion in residential mortgage debt, $170 billion in home equity lines of credit, $102 billion in auto loans, and over $110 billion in credit card debt. The credit card debt is a stat that I've been tracking for a while, and it really looks like it's picking up over the past few years and definitely exceeding the long-term trend. My suspicion is that with higher debt payments and a higher cost of living, people are starting to put part of their basic living expenses on credit cards in the hope that things will improve before they run out of money to borrow. One of the big red flags to me is that in the last 3 years, we've been in a situation where the bottom 60% of households in terms of income have had a negative savings rate, meaning that they're spending more money than they're bringing in. Along with that, if we look at the debt service ratios of households, which is the portion of their disposable income that they're spending on debt payments, the overall debt service ratio is roughly 15%, which is tied for the highest it's ever been. In addition, the interest-only portion of that debt service ratio is 9.6%, which is the highest it's been since 1992, over 30 years ago. So, Canadian households are putting more and more of their income towards debt payments, and a larger portion of those payments are going towards interest, meaning that less and less is going towards actually paying down the debt. We'll see how the situation develops in the coming year or two, but it doesn't exactly look great for the overall state of Canadian household finances. Finally, StatCan released the inflation numbers for October, and inflation has risen to 2% on a year-over-year basis, up from 1.6% the month before. The Bank of Canada's preferred measures of core inflation, CPI trim and CPI median, rose to 2.6% and 2.5% respectively, which is an increase from last month, but still within their target range of 1 to 3%. This information, combined with the recent upward revisions of Canada's GDP growth over the last few years, as well as the recently announced tax holiday that we discussed earlier, have put a damper on expectations that the Bank of Canada will be making another 50-point rate cut in December, which had been widely anticipated after the previous 50-point rate cut in October. However, markets are still pricing in a 25-point cut in December because despite the uptick in inflation and the stronger GDP data, there are still signs that the Canadian economy is sluggish. For example, in the Bank of Canada's latest monetary policy report, they mentioned that consumer spending per person has declined in 5 of the last 6 quarters, as well as general weakness in business investment. I've said this several times before, but I'll say it again. The Bank of Canada is being pulled in different directions with their monetary policy, and it's largely due to overall weakness in the economy. They don't want to keep rates this high for too long because households have huge debt burdens and a lot of their income is being eaten up by debt payments. At the same time, they don't want to cut rates too much and see a return to high inflation. We're also seeing the US Federal Reserve keeping rates higher for longer, and if the Bank of Canada cuts rates much faster than the US, we risk devaluing our currency. The way I see it, over the past 15 or so years, our economy has come to rely too much on cheap debt and expensive housing to create the illusion of growth. Now that interest rates are returning to historical norms, we're seeing that we don't have enough actual productive activity in the economy to carry us through a normal interest rate environment. By the way, speaking of housing and interest rates, after the 50-point cut in October, I saw a flood of realtors on social media talking about how now was the time to buy and you'd be able to get a cheaper mortgage before prices start to shoot up. So I just want to take a second and explain to you why I think this is wrong. The Bank of Canada's rate cuts do affect mortgage rates in the short term, but only for variable rate mortgages. And right now, variable rates are more expensive than fixed rates. So the lowest interest rate and highest budget you're going to qualify for on a mortgage is still generally going to be on a fixed rate. But fixed rate mortgages aren't based on the Bank of Canada's overnight rate. They're based on bond yields in the open market. And right now, bond yields are actually increasing. Over the past couple of months, even as the Bank of Canada cut their policy rate by 50 basis points, the yield on 5-year bonds has increased by 50 basis points. This is because investors expect interest rates to be higher for longer, largely due to the US being fairly slow to cut rates. So is that 50-point rate cut an opportunity to rush out and get a great deal on a house? Probably not. As always, if you're looking at buying, you should take the time to do the math for your own financial situation and make a decision that's right for you. Don't get yourself into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt based solely on hype or FOMO. Over the past couple of years, I've seen so many people who are just drowning in debt because they followed the conventional wisdom of spending as much as they possibly could to get into homeownership, and now they're getting absolutely hammered because they didn't think that interest rates could go up. It's a very important financial decision, so take it seriously and do your best to understand the choice you're making. Anyway, that's all for this week, so as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.